Welcome to this presentation on the degree of philosophy, politics and economics. One of the first questions that has to be answered is why one would want to study the three subjects together. I have often referred to this particular quote by John Maynard Keynes, which comes at the very end of the general theory. The ideas of economists and political philosophers, both when they're right and when they're wrong, are more powerful than is commonly understood. Indeed, the word is ruled by little else. That, for me, although John Maynard Keynes did not study PPE, for me, this represents the rationale for wanting to do a degree that looks at the three subjects separately but also jointly. Effectively, what happens is there are the three possible lenses through which certain phenomena can be studied. PPE at Durham is effectively informed very much by this quote of John Maynard Keynes, because effectively, unlike other PPE degrees in the country, what happens is that all three subjects are to be carried to the end of the degree over the 3 years, and there isn't an opportunity to drop one of the subjects, as is often is the case, either to be required to do so or have the opportunity to do so in the vast majority of other PPE degrees in the country. This characteristic is one I will return to several stages in this presentation because it informs both the entry requirements and the structure of the degree, and I'm going to show you to the extent to which this happens. Then obviously there are many other advantages of studying at Durham, and obviously these are the fact that we have excellent teaching facilities, we provide excellent career prospects as demonstrated by some of the highest levels of employability of our own students, and what we also provide in the three departments is a wide range of optional modules that can be chosen. As it happens, I'm going to explain that there are core modules that have to be done, but then alongside this there are also some options. So, in the first instance, what is it that we require in order to study PPE at Durham? And I stress again, I return to the issue that we carry on the three subjects all the way to the third year, more or less. Okay, so our standard typical offers are for a level A star AA, and this is a general rule in Durham, the general studies in critical thinking, and for that matter, the extended project, do not count towards this offer. Okay, now this is the general statement that we have. Then we have the subject-specific requirements that we have. So, for instance, in the first case, we do need to have an A at A-level mathematics, because the economics part of the degree requires a level of mathematical ability that is substantial, and therefore there's no way in which the students could cope with that level without having done at least A-level mathematics. Further mathematics is not a requirement. If the student is doing it, that's fine, but because the degree thrives on its eclecticism, what happens is the further maths doesn't constitute a part of the A-star AA offer, because effectively what we want is for the student to have in its prior background the ability, the eclecticism to cope with three subjects, I stress, not just 3 levels, 3 subjects, 3 different subjects, as indeed is going to be the case in Durham for PPE. What we also require, so if you can imagine that the A-level mathematics represents the requirement for the economics side of the degree, the requirement for the other two sides, politics and philosophy, is that we require an arts and humanities subject to A2 level. Okay, what does it mean, an arts and humanities subject? Now, this is an impossible question, effectively. So what we have provided on the PPE website is a list of subjects with which past applicants have satisfied this requirement. And the list comprises the obvious suspects. Obviously, there will be philosophy. Obviously, there will be history, there will be government and politics, there will be, we accept any modern or ancient language. We have accepted sociology in the past, we have accepted geography, and so on and so forth. The list is impossible for it to be exhaustive. So if you have a question whether something is included or not, then you can certainly ask, and then we can tell you whether that particular subject qualifies. One of the subjects you're going to find is not listed in that list, and it is deliberate, is economics. The logic here is that with this arts and humanities subject, what we are trying to do is cater for the politics and philosophy side of the degree, whilst the A-level mathematics matched the requirement for the economics side of the degree. So to allow economics to count here would have been a sort of double counting. By all means, you can do economics, but that doesn't fulfill that requirement. I've seen many applications with, for instance, mathematics, economics, and history, and they're fine. They match the requirements because the mathematics is there and the history is there. The economics is an added element, but it's not necessarily requirement. It's not a requirement. Indeed, for your information, A-level economics is not a requirement even for single honors economics. This general statement translates into equivalent terms that are updated every year at the university. So this is the equivalent of 38 points in the international baccalaureate with 666 in higher level subjects. And if mathematics is studied at a higher level, then we want a 6. If it is studied at standard level, we want a 7. And there are a number of other possible changes of this that I've listed here as a possibility. Okay, that's why we need that kind of eclecticism, and we ask for that eclecticism to be present already in applicants as they come to Durham. Now, what happens when the student comes to Durham? What's the structure of the degree? Now, Durham is organizing terms, the Michaelmas, Epiphany, and Easter term, call them autumn, winter, and spring, if you so prefer. And what happens is that for any year, academic year for which the student is registered in Durham, the student studies 6 modules in totals. Now, these modules comprise lectures and tutorials or small group sessions of one type or another, and I'm going to discuss these a bit more. But effectively, the basic number is 6 each year that carry on. Now, what is it the students do over the course of the 3 years in PPE? Now, in the first year, what happens is that the students effectively solomonically divided in 3. The students does 2 in economics, 2 in philosophy, and 2 in politics. Now, because there is this need to lay the foundation of the study of the 3 subjects at a higher level, then what we're going to find is that the first year of PPE leaves very, very little choice, indeed hardly any, because effectively 5 of the 6 modules are already chosen. They are core modules, they are compulsory module. So, and then there is effectively 5 degrees of freedom, because 1 degree of freedom out of 5 for a further politics module in the first year. Now, if I can go through briefly, principles of economics goes through the basics of economic theory. It is microeconomics in the first term and macroeconomics in the second term, and I teach the second term. Economic methods goes into calculus largely in the first term and statistics in the second term. Then what you have is the 2 philosophy modules, knowledge and reality. Ethics and values, I think, is self-explanatory in the first instance. Knowledge and reality addresses a number of other issues. They are introductory courses to various aspects, various strands on philosophy, so that the student is able to cope with subsequent modules. And then there is a basic introductory module of political theory, and as I said, a number of options. The numbers are limited, but that's the logic of it. Now, that's the situation which is very solomonically divided, as I said, in the first year. A bit of the structure of teaching that I need to tell you on this. As I said, for each module, there are lectures and small group sessions. Let's talk about the lectures first. For all modules in politics and in philosophy, there is 1 hour of lectures per week. So you can count 4 hours of lectures on the philosophy and the politics modules together. Now, in economics, we take the view that certain modules require 2 hours of lectures per week for various reasons. So effectively, what you have is that there are another 4 hours of economics lectures in per week, making it a total of 8 hours of lectures. Then what happens for each of these modules, and that's going to be true for all modules even in subsequent year, the pattern is that there are lectures and that there are small group sessions. And the small group sessions vary in purpose and content. To give you an example, in philosophy, they tend to be discussion groups. In economics, more often, they tend to be classes that go through exercises either in economic theory or in mathematics of one type or another. And in politics, sometimes they take the form of group representation, but it's impossible to generalize here. Well, the point is that much as there are variations across modules and across the 3 departments, the most normal pattern that exists in Durham is for there to be 8 such small group sessions to be attended over the course of the entire academic year, which is the teaching terms are the first term, the Michaelmas term, and the Epiphany term. So, and these small group sessions recur every fortnight. Okay, every other week there is one such term. So, in terms of the expected contact hours per week, we had 8 hours of lectures, and to this, if we imagine that the student has managed to split the load of the tutorial groups evenly across the fortnight, you add 3 hours of small group sessions, making a total of 11 contact hours in the first year. Now, over the years, over the second and third year, the number of contact hours goes progressively down, and that's deliberate. The logic that exists here is that we think that the student needs more contact hours at the beginning of the degree and progressively is able to deal and cope with independent research and independent study a lot more. That is ultimately represented by what the student does in the third year, which in particular is represented by the dissertation, on which I'm going to talk later. Now, effectively, this is the basis of the first year. Now, the pattern of teaching is the same year on year. It is the first 2 terms are taught, and the third term, largely, there are some revision lectures, but largely is dedicated to exams. It's difficult to generalize because all modules may have an assessed essay. The percentage that that counts for the final module mark is difficult to state, so there are differences here. Some modules are 100% exam. Principles of Economics, for instance, is 100% exam. Now, the logic is that the student must pass all 6 modules, and the pass mark is 40%. Should there be, and that is effectively what we look at the end of the first year, when we have the prelims board of examiners, at which point, if the student has passed all modules, then the student progresses and proceeds to the second year. Should any of these modules not be passed at 40%, there is a receipt opportunity in August whose mark is, however, capped at 40%. Okay, well, that's the basic of the logic. But in any case, let's look on the bright side of life, and let's imagine that the student progresses from the first year and goes into the second year. I've told you earlier that we carry on with the 3 subjects all the way through. I've also slipped in that said that there is a possibility of specializing. Okay. How do we specialize? And in the first instance, what happens afterwards when in the subsequent 2 years, in the second and third year? The basic rule is this: that all 3 subjects must be studied to a minimum of 2 modules across level 2 and level 3. And what happens is this, that some departments specify are more prescriptive about which modules, if the particular subject is to be minimized to just 2 modules, which modules those are going to be. And those others are less prescriptive. Let's see what I mean. We in economics, we start with mine, we in economics, I'm an economist, are most prescriptive of all. We say if the student just studies 2 modules in economics, these 2 have to be macroeconomics and microeconomics, both of which are second-year modules, and I teach macroeconomics for that matter. And these modules can be studied either in the second year, both of them in the second year, or they can be split and put one in the second year and one in the third year. But if the student minimizes economics, these 2 have to be taken. Further down in this scale of prescriptiveness, we have my colleagues in philosophy. In philosophy, what they say is this. The student in the second year has got to do one of these 2, either political philosophy or philosophy of economics. And this is one of the ways in which philosophy provides effectively the links that exist to the other 2 subjects. So one of these 2 has to be done. And then what they also say is across level 2 and level 3, and the student can choose to do them in level 2, but can decide to split. 1 out of these 5 has to be studied: moral theory, moral philosophy 1, language, logic and reality, philosophy of mind and fundamentals of logic. Okay, so effectively they are more permissive, they are less prescriptive than we are in economics, but nonetheless there are clear indications of what has to be done. Now, my colleagues in the School of Government and International Affairs are the least prescriptive on them all, in the sense that if you intend to do just 2 politics modules, any 2 would do, 1 at level 2 and 1 at level 3, if that is what you want. Okay, that's the logic. Now, let's do some calculations. So, if we take the second and third year modules together, they make 6 and 6, 12. Imagine that this particular student chooses to minimize 2 subjects to just the 2 required. That creates a situation in which this student can specialize to the maximum of 8 modules in any one of the 3 subjects. Now, because the permutations are many and are a bit complex, effectively what I have done, I have created 3 templates. What I say to students, and I repeat these when they come here, because effectively all PPE is to do a variations of these 3 paths. These are represents the maximum level of specialization that can be achieved in any within PPE. One can do less specialization, but not more. Okay. Now let's see what I have created. So let's start from saying the first instance. We'll start with someone who intends to specialize in philosophy. Now, it's useful to start from the third year. You see that the dissertation is repeated twice. This is not a mistake. All students have to do a dissertation either in philosophy or in politics or in economics, one of the 3. And that dissertation counts double. Of the 6 marks that the students obtains in the third year, 2 are represented by this dissertation. Obviously, the dissertation is submitted once, but it counts double. Okay? And there are subtle differences between the dissertation process in the 3 departments, but the basics of the rules is the same. Now, why do I start from this? Because effectively what happens is this, that a choice of where to do the dissertation informs the choice of modules done in the second year. I tend to say that a student coming to do PPE at Durham should start thinking already in his or first year where to do the dissertation. Okay, there are possibilities of keeping options open, but there's a limit to this. So the logic is, in order to do the dissertation in philosophy in this third year, what is it that the student has to do in the second year? And the answer is at least 2 modules in philosophy. So, and that's normal, then the student will have to do political philosophy in this case, and then has to do, obviously, one of those 5 and possibly something else. And I filled out the rest because that seemed to to be logical, and there is a further list of possible options that exist in this respect. But that was the basic logic. Now, as you can see, all that is in yellow, that's all philosophy, and they count as 8 modules in total. Then what happens is that the other 2 subjects are minimized to the required 2. Economics is just 2, and it is split micro and macro across level 2 and level 3. And the politics modules, in this case, it seemed logical to choose these 2, are again split 1 at level 2 and 1 at level 3. Okay, that's one of the possibilities of the specialization. The second one is obviously one of someone who wants to do a lot in politics. So there is a double dissertation. Again, you can see it repeated in the 3rd year in the level 3. Okay, in order to do the double dissertation in politics in the 3rd year, a requirement is to have done the research project in the 2nd year, research project in politics in the 2nd year. Okay, so, and that's effectively what matches here. So what we say then I filled out effectively all the other terms with what I could find, and please don't get fixated exactly on these exact module titles, because sometimes they change, sometimes not all the times are they available, especially in politics in particular. Certain times these specific modules may not be available because the member of staff is on research leave, but the structure is that one. Now, as you can see, all the politics modules are in red. You see there are technical reasons that determine here that you can do 3 in the 2nd year and 5 in the 3rd year, but 3 and 5 makes 8 nonetheless. Okay, and there are technical elements here. The point is that one of the clauses of the regulations to specify that the student has to do at least 2 subjects, modules from at least 2 departments in the 3rd year. So there isn't a possibility of doing the entirety of a 3rd year in a single subject, in a single department. And then obviously what happens is that the other 2 subjects are minimized to the required 2. In this case, philosophy is minimized to political philosophy and moral theory, and economics again is split between micro and macro. Before I go further, because I know that this is a question that often comes up, can a student keep his or her options open as to where to do the dissertation? Or does it have to be decided earlier? Now, this case, as it happens, is by chance, I'll put it this way. This case represents the choice of the level 2, represents a situation where the student has kept options open. Ignore level 3. If you just look at the choice of level 2, the student qualifies for the dissertation in politics because has done research project in politics, but also qualifies for the dissertation in philosophy because he or she has done 2 modules in philosophy. He or she does not qualify for a dissertation in economics, but that's a different story. But it tends to be the case that by the end of the 3rd year, when students choose to register for the modules they're going to do in the 2nd year, it tends to be the case that they are in a position to rule out one of the 3 subjects, doing the dissertation, I mean, in one of the 3 subjects. Quite often is it the case that they tend to say, well, I'll keep my options open on 1 or 2 of these, and the choice at level 2 represents such a combination. Okay. Now, obviously, there's a 3rd option. The 3rd possibility is someone who specializes a lot in economics. Now, in order to do the dissertation in economics, again, is double, for obvious reasons, in the 3rd year, then the student must do micro and macro in the 2nd year together. There's no possibility of splitting them now. They have to be done in the 2nd year. Then what I also say is it's not a requirement, but it is advisable, that sometimes students do an empirical investigation in their dissertation, an econometric exercise. Not necessarily, but sometimes they do. Now, in order to keep the options open of being able to do such an exercise, then it is advisable, but not required, also to take economic data analysis, which you can see on level on the left-hand side, that represents our level of econometrics, statistical methods in economics. Okay, And then I filled out the rest of economics as I saw fit, effectively, a bit randomly, because I said, well, this might be of interest. And in the third year, I've put history of economics, thought, and post-Keynesian economics, because I thought they would be interesting. But that's besides the point. Again, blue represents all the economics modules. You can count them, 4 in the second year, 4 in the third year, making 8 again. Then what happens is that the other 2 subjects are minimized to the required 2. What you have is philosophy of economics in the second year, because one of those 2, either philosophy of economics or political philosophy, has to be taken in the second year, and we have philosophy of mind in the third year. And I've gone, in this particular case, for political economy modules in the politics ones. But that's the logic. Effectively, what happens is that PPEs, one way or another, always come as variations of these 3 themes. To an extent, a specialization has to be achieved, because well, it's by construction has to be chosen, some specialization, because the student will have to do a dissertation in one of the 3 subjects. And then there is another little requirement that says that given the dissertation, the student must also do a third-year module in the very same department. So effectively, to an extent, there has to be some specialization. I think it never is the possibility of splitting the 3 subject Solomonically across level 2 and level 3 of 4 subject 1 on each. That's not a possibility. There will be a stage at which one of these will have at least 5 modules. But that, I have to say, rarely is it the case that students choose to keep spreading themselves so widely across the 3 subjects. Okay. Now, one of the things that I need to say, obviously, the structure of the years is the same as we were saying earlier, as the same as the first years we were discussing, i.e. we have terms, Michaelmas, Epiphany and Easter term. The first 2 terms are taught terms, then there tend to be some revision lectures in the third term and exams. And there is a variety of patterns here as to assess the essay or not assess project, whether the module is entirely assessed by submission of an essay. There are all manners of things that change here, so it is impossible to generalize. Nonetheless, what happens is that the student has to pass all modules, all the level 2 modules, by 40%, at least 40%. Should any of the second year modules not be passed at 40%, there is a receipt opportunity in August, whose mark is, however, capped at 40%. But otherwise, the student progresses and proceeds to the third year. Now, when it comes to the third year, obviously the modules have to be passed again. There is no receipt opportunity, and effectively what happens is towards the end of the third year, we come to the classification of the degree. And the classification of the degree is based on the weighted average on the second and final year. Okay. What we do is we take 40%. We take the marks, the averages of the marks of the second year, and we give a weight of 40%. We take the marks the third year, and we give them a weight of 60%. Why do we do this? Well, the logic of doing this is that we consider that the student has obviously matured over the years, and by the time the student takes the third year, the student has chosen a lot more of what his or her degree is going to be like, and therefore it is fairer to place a greater weight at the stage when the student has had a greater input. If you look at the degrees that we have done, at the specification we have seen earlier, effectively in the second year there are these core modules that are chosen for the students, whereas largely in the third year, with the exception of one, in this particular case, the student has chosen everything else on his or her own volition, so to speak, and that's what we do. More that I wanted to say, returning to the point of the contact hours. The contact hours go down in terms over the years. Again, the issue that arises is how many modules are done in economics. Economics, micro and macro, retain 2 hours of lectures per week, but all the other modules in philosophy and politics are 1 hour per week. So it crucially depends on how many when the economics modules are taken, because effectively those will have the core modules, will have a higher number of hours that exist. There is a similar kind of level. It will be slightly less depending relative to the first year, but that's the logic of it. But when it comes to the third year, obviously you have to imagine that there are 4 modules that the student is doing only. So at most there are 4 lecture hours per week. And consequently there are also only 4 tutorial groups of one type or another that the student has to attend. If you imagine that the student has split the tutorial work evenly across the fortnight, that means there is just 2 hours of tutorial work. And then there is the dissertation. The dissertation is a different story. The dissertation is that at a certain point the student is assigned a supervisor, and over the terms of the preparation, the student meets with the supervisor. And effectively that is the equivalent of the tutorial work for the dissertation. But it is deliberate that by the time the student reaches the third year, the number of contact hours has gone down substantially. Effectively, in the horrible language we use, we tend to say that whilst in the first few years, first and second, the student is a consumer of knowledge, by the third year he or she has become a producer of knowledge. It's horrible language, but it conveys the meaning. That effectively by that stage a lot more relies on independent study, a lot more relies on the ability of the student to produce a piece of work, exemplified in particular a dissertation, that is of her own choice and that represents his or her ability to produce knowledge. That's the logic of it. Now, one of the things that I wanted to show you also is the typical classification results. Now, these are the 2019 results, because the 2020 ones haven't been released yet. They are typical. Okay, here we are talking about something like 85 to 90. Not 90 wouldn't reach 90 students. And roughly speaking, what you have is 67% or 2/3, let's call them, get a 2-1, and a third, 32%, get a first. The lower second, in this case, if I remember right, it was just 1 student. There tend to be very, very few observations on any other classifications. Most people would say this is high. It is, but then students tend to enter with very high qualifications. They are high quality students, and therefore if we saw a degree classification that it was any different than this, it would mean that we had done something wrong, and we don't think we do anything wrong in this. Okay, now what I've just described here is the structure of the only degree for which you can apply, which is the 3 years PPE degree, which has the code VL52. The UCAS code is VL52. That's the only degree you can apply for direct entry into Durham. However, once you have been accepted by Durham, okay, there are 2 more degrees you can transfer to, and you transfer to these in the course of your second year. The 2 degrees that the students can transfer to, having completed the first year, are PPE, we studied abroad, VLLA, and work placement, VLL6. Both are 4 years degree. Now, there are many more observations for the study abroad year than there are for the work placement. I'm going to explain to you how this works. Now, for the study abroad degree, what happens is the student is in Durham for the first and second year, is abroad for the third year, and comes back to Durham for the fourth year. And the fourth year in Durham has the same pattern as the third year of the VL52 3 years degree, the normal PPE degree, dissertation, etc., etc. In the past, what we have seen is the students have gone to universities where there is a university-wide exchange with Durham, or with exchanges that are specific to the 3 departments. To give you some examples, I've known students to go to Aix-en-Provence, Sciences Po in Paris, Mannheim, Pisa, Lewis in Rome, Lund, if I remember rightly, Salamanca, Vancouver, Hong Kong, Boston College in the United States. These are the kind of places where I have seen students go. Now, one of the requirements, one of the stipulations is that the student abroad must study a combination of the 3 subjects that is as closely as possible, replicating a reasonable balance of the 3 subjects as they would be studied in Durham. Reasonable in this particular instance means at least 2 of the 3, because we recognize that doing all 3 is not necessarily going to be possible abroad, but that's the logic. Now, the classification of the degree is done on the basis of the second and fourth year average, weighted again at 40% and 60% as before. As I said, we have many observations for the study abroad degree. Indeed, roughly speaking, each year of a cohort of something like 90 PPE students graduating, 10 or so would be fourth year, having come abroad, having come back from a year abroad. Okay, the marks of the year abroad, the exams have to be passed, but the marks do not count towards the final classification. There are far fewer observations on the work placement. The structure is sort of similar in the sense that the first, second, and fourth year are in Durham, and again the fourth year matches the third year of the normal degree, a normal 3 years degree with dissertation, etc. Except the third year is spent working. Now, when work placements degrees were instituted, we started with accounting degrees, and obviously it was quite obvious where the work would be done. When it was extended to the other degrees, and when specifically when it came to PPE, it was impossible to be so clear as to where the student would want to decide to work, and therefore the regulations were left deliberately on the vague side, with the logic that it's up to the student to find the relevant contract, and it is then for the contract to match our criteria, and if it does match our criteria, then there's no problem, we go ahead. So there isn't a specific structure that we say. I can say there are very few observations here. I can say that I know students, one work for KPMG, another one work for an investment bank. These are the 2 I remember. The degree hasn't been in operation for many years, and as I said, there are very, very few observations on this one. But that's the logic. And again, the purpose of maintaining the regulations vague was for the sake of allowing PPEs to spread with their wings, so to speak, to find what it is that they really wanted to do, and then to find a way for this to be possible within the context of the degree. Okay, so this is basically the logic of the story, and this represents the substance of the PPE, the basic structure of the PPE degree. There may be questions that you may have. Now, I understand that there is a specific page on the university website where you have a form where you can fill out the specific questions that you have, and then it is processed and finds its way to those who are in a position to answer. Thank you.